Here we go. All right, chapter 12. An iron giraffe. A red giraffe that made very loud noises. The giraffe was a tall drill that had been brought to the village by the 2 men who had visited earlier. They had returned with a crew of 10 more men in 2 trucks, one hauling the giraffe drill along with other mysterious equipment, and the other loaded with plastic pipe. Meanwhile, the land was still being cleared. Naya's mother tied the baby on her back and walked with several other women to a place between the village and the pond. They collected piles of rocks and stones and tied them up into bundles with sturdy cloth. They balanced the bundles on their heads, walked back to the drilling site, and emptied the rocks onto the ground. Other villagers, using tools borrowed from the visitors, pounded the rocks to break them up into gravel. Many loads of gravel would be needed. Naya didn't know why. The piles of gravel grew larger each day. The clangor of machinery and hammer greeted Naya each time she returned from the pond. Unfamiliar noises that mingled with the voices of men shouting and women singing. It was the sound of people working hard together, but it did not sound at all like water. Okay, so, like what now? Like anybody in the gallery have any, Yarly?
Like the men were like very, like they took trucks and drills and they were like drilling in the ground.
Okay, yep. So that's kind of like all we know. Kind of like what so land is still being cleared. Equipment, trucks, and tools. What was the rest of what you said, Yareli?
That they were like drilling in the ground.
Drilling in the ground. Good. Okay. All right. Oh, and now I noticed too, it says 2009. So I guess it's been, so maybe from December, okay, maybe now it's like January or February. I don't actually know, but I do know that I see that it's 2009 now. Okay. I'm going to put that right to the side right here. 2009 all of a sudden. Okay. Let's read about Salva. At the refugee camp in Ethiopia. So now we're kind of in Ethiopia. I'm going to write that on the side before I start. Ethiopia. Okay. Mother, please. Salva opened his mouth to call out again, but the words did not come. Instead, he closed his mouth, lowered his head, and turned away. The woman in the orange-head scarf was not his mother. He knew this for certain, even though she was still far away and he had not seen her face. Uncle's words came back to him. The village of Lonarik was attacked, burned. Few people survived. No one knows where they are now. In the moment before calling out to the woman a second time, Salva realized what Uncle had truly meant. Something Salva had known in his heart for a long time. His family was gone. They had been killed by bullets or bombs, starvation or sickness. It did not matter how. What mattered was that Salva was on his own now. He felt as though he were standing on the edge of a giant hole, a hole filled with the black despair of nothingness. I am alone now. I am all that is left of my family. His father, who had sent Salva to school, brought him treats like mangoes, trusted him to take care of the herd. His mother, always ready with food and milk, and a soft hand to stroke Salva's head. His brothers and sisters, whom he had laughed with and played with and looked after, he would never see them again. How can I go on without them? But how can I not go on? They would want me to survive, to grow up and make something of myself, of my life, to honor their memories. What was it Uncle had said during that first terrible day in the desert? And he remembers. Do you see that group of bushes? You need only to walk as far as those bushes. Uncle had helped him get through the desert That way, bit by bit, one step at a time. Perhaps Salva could get through the life at the camp in the same way. I need only to get through the rest of this day, he told himself. This day and no other. If someone had told Salva that he would live in the camp for 6 years, he never would have believed it. Yes, 6 years later. Now we're in July 1991. Okay. They're going to close the camp. Everyone will have to leave. That's impossible. Where will we go? That's what they're saying. Not just this camp, all of them. The rumors skittered around the camp. Everyone was uneasy. As the days went by, the uneasiness grew into fear. Salva was almost 17 years old now, a young man. He tried to learn what he could about the rumors by talking to the aid workers in the camp. They told him that the Ethiopian government was near collapse, that the refugee camps were run by foreign aid groups, but it was the government that permitted them to operate. If the government fell, what would the new rulers do about the camps? When that question was answered, no one was ready. One rainy morning, as Salva walked toward the school tent, long lines of trucks were arriving. Masses of armed soldiers poured out of the trucks and ordered everyone to leave. The orders were not just to leave the camp, but to leave Ethiopia. Immediately, there was chaos. It was as if the people ceased to be people and instead became an enormous herd of panicked, stampeding, two-legged creatures. Salva was caught up in the surge. His feet barely touched the ground as he was swept along by the crowd of thousands of people running and screaming. The rain, which was falling in torrents, so not just like sprinkling, like pouring down, added to the uproar. Okay, so it's like mass chaos. Like they're being told to leave, put everything away that you don't need right now. And on top of that, so they're scared, they're panicking, they're running around figuring out where to go, and it's pouring rain. It says the soldiers fired their guns into the air and chased the people away from the camp. But once they were beyond the area surrounding the camp, the soldiers continued to drive them onward, shouting and shooting. As he dashed ahead, Salva heard snatches of talk. The river. They're chasing us towards the river. Salva knew which river they meant, the Hilo River, which was along the border between Ethiopia and Sudan. They are driving us back to Sudan, Salva thought. They will force us to cross the river. It was the rainy season. Swollen by the rains, the Hilo's current would be merciless. The Hilo was well known for something else, too. Crocodiles. Okay. All right, so... okay, so let's see. We're going to say, no mom. Shh, listen, no mom. Then...
Should we say no family?
No family. No mom, no family. Then it's 1991. He's 17 years old. Y-O means years old, 17 years old. Okay, and then at that time, refugees being forced from camps. They're closing the camps. Okay. Okay. Chapter 13, Southern Sudan, 2009. Back to Naya. Last thing we just read from Naya says, but it did not sound at all like water. Okay, the equipment, the trucks, the drilling. Naya thought it was funny. You had to have water to find water. Water had to be flowing constantly into the borehole to keep the drilling running smoothly. The crew drove to the pond and back several times a day. The pond water was piped into what looked like a giant plastic bag, a bag big enough to fill the entire bed of the truck. The bag sprang a leak. The leak had to be patched. The patch sprang a leak. The crew patched the patch. Then the bag sprang another leak. The drilling could not go on. The drilling crew was discouraged by the leaks. They wanted to stop working, but their boss kept them going. All the workers wore the same blue coveralls, like overalls, Still, Naya could tell who was the boss. He was one of the two men who had first come to the village. The other man seemed to be his main assistant. The boss would encourage the workers and laugh and joke with them. If that didn't work, he would talk to them earnestly and try to persuade them. And if that didn't work, he would get angry. He didn't get angry very often. He kept working and kept the others working too. They patched the bag again. The drilling went on. Okay. Raise your hand. What are they drilling? What exactly are they drilling? Jose? A well. They're drilling a well. A well for what?
Water.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. Okay. No. Shh. You go close the door. Okay. I'm going to say bag keeps leaking. Okay. Here we go. Ready? Salva. Jose. It's a different font and it's a different color font too. Yeah. All right. Now look at Salva's chapter. It says Ethiopia, Sudan, Kenya, 1991 through 1992. So this is like a whole year. We'll see what happens. Okay. It says hundreds of people, remember heading to that river, okay, with the really bad, the current and crocodiles. Okay. Hundreds of people lined the riverbank. The soldiers were forcing some of them into the water, prodding them with their rifle butts, shooting into the air. They're like just literally forcing these people. Like they're shooting their guns. They're like using the back of the gun to like push them in. Okay. Other people, afraid of the soldiers and their guns, were leaping into the water on their own. They were immediately swept downstream by the powerful current. Try to picture this. As Salva crouched on the bank and watched, a young man near him plunged into the water. The current carried him swiftly downstream, but he was also making a little progress across the river. So this river is going, and they're trying to go across, but as they go across, you know, like if you ever go into the beach, like you go into the beach
like
one
the
way, and then all of a sudden you like are done playing, and your umbrella tent is like that way?
Yeah.
That's what's happening. Okay, but it's a little more
Like it's like
severe.
a lazy river, like when you're trying to walk in a lake.
Kind of, yes. Okay. Then Salva saw the telltale flick of a crocodile's tail as it flopped into the water near the young man. Moments later, the man's head jerked oddly. Once, twice. His mouth was open. Perhaps he was screaming. But Salva could not hear him over the din of the crowd and the rain. A moment later, the man was pulled under. A cloud of red stained the water.
Bye.
The rain was still pouring down, and now bullets were pouring down as well. The soldiers started shooting into the river, aiming their guns at the people who were trying to get across. Why? Why are they shooting at us? Salva had no choice. He jumped into the water and began to swim. A boy next to him grabbed him around the neck and clung to him tightly. Salva was forced under the surface without time to take more than a quick, shallow breath. So someone's panicking and grabbing onto him because they're scared and Salva struggled, kicking, clawing. He's holding on to me too hard. I can't. Air. No air left. Suddenly the boy's grip loosened and Salva launched himself upward. He threw his head back and took a huge gulp of air. For a few moments he could do nothing but gasp and choke. When his vision cleared, he saw why the boy had let go. He was floating with his head down, blood streaming from a bullet hole in the back of his neck. Stunned, Salva realized that being forced under the water had probably saved his life. But there was no time to marvel over this. More crocodiles were launching themselves off the banks. The rain, the mad current, the bullets, the crocodiles, the welter of arms and legs, the screams, the blood. He had to get across somehow. Salva did not know how long he was in the water. It felt like hours, years. When at last the tips of his toes touched the mud, he forced his limbs to make swimming motions one last time. He crawled onto the riverbank and collapsed. Then he lay there in the mud, choking and sobbing for breath. Later, he would learn that at least 1,000 people had died trying to cross that river that day, drowned or shot or attacked by crocodiles. How was he not one of the 1,000? Why was he one of the lucky ones? All right, so now he's on to the land. The walking began again. Walking, but to where? No one knew anything for sure. Where was Salva supposed to go? Not home. There was still war everywhere in Sudan. Not back to Ethiopia. The soldiers would shoot us. Kenya. There are supposed to be refugee camps in Kenya. Salva made up his mind. He would walk south to Kenya. He did not know what he would find once he got there, but it seemed to be his best choice. Crowds of other boys followed him. Nobody talked about it, but by the end of the first day, Salva had become the leader of a group of about 1,500 boys. Some of them were as young as 5 years old. Those smallest boys reminded Salva of his brother Kuol. But then he had an astounding thought. Kuol isn't that age anymore. He's a teenager now. Salva found that he could only think of his brothers and sisters as they were when he had last seen them, and not as they would be now. They were traveling through a part of Sudan that was still plagued by war. The fighting and bombing were worse during the day, so Salva decided that the group should hide when the sun shone and do their walking at night. It's kind of opposite, you would think. But in the darkness, it was hard to be sure that they were headed in the right direction. Sometimes the boys traveled for days only to realize that they had gone in a huge circle. This happened so many times that Salva lost count. They met other groups of boys, all walking south. Every group had stories of terrible peril. Boys who had been hurt or killed by bullets or bombs, attacked by wild animals, or left behind because they were too weak or sick to keep up. When Salva heard the stories, he thought of Marial. He felt his determination growing as it had in the days after Uncle's death. I will get us safely to Kenya, he thought, no matter how hard it is. He organized the group, giving everyone a job. Scavenge for food, collect firewood, stand guard while the group slept. Whatever food or water they found was shared equally among all of them. When the smaller boys grew too tired to walk, the older boys took turns carrying them on their backs. There were times when some of the boys did not want to do their share of the work. Salva would talk to them, encourage them, coax them, and persuade them. Once in a while he had to speak sternly or even shout, but he tried not to do this too often. It was as if Salva's family were helping him, even though they were not there. He remembered how he had looked after his little brother Kuol, but he also knew what it felt like to have to listen to the older ones, Arik and Ring. And he could recall the gentleness of his sisters, the strength of his father, and the care of his mother. Most of all, he remembered how Uncle had encouraged him in the desert. One step at a time, one day at a time. Just today, just to get through this day. Salva told him this himself every day. He told the boys in the group too. And one day at a time, the group made its way to Kenya. More than 1,200 boys arrived safely. It took them a year and a half. Okay, let's look at the map. Okay, so, all right. Okay, so there is Itang. Here's the Hilo River right here. So they crossed it, okay, down into Kenya. Okay, right here. It took them a year and a half. Whoa. That was an intense chapter. Okay, so we're going to keep this short. I know. We're going to say, I know, while crossing Hilo River, boys died from crocs. It said, shots, getting shot, crocodiles, drowning. Okay. Salva made it. 1.5 years later, he led group to Kenya. So that implies right there where it says he led group to Kenya, that implies that he became the leader. You can keep writing on this stuff.